Jesus taught his followers to pray that God's will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. If we really meant that, how different would our actions be? Are we blessing the earth or destroying it? Modern science and ancient Celtic Christianity both suggest a better way of being, exercising an ethic of stewardship, not dominion. On earth as it is in heaven, exploring our home, our faith, and what it means when they converge.
Hi, welcome to Darkwood Brew, where ancient Christian mystical practice is blended with modern interactive web technology, world-class jazz, arts, biblical scholarship, and well, you never know exactly what's going to happen. Hey, do you hear something? Speaking of never knowing what's going to happen? What is that? Do you have indigestion? No? Oh, yeah. I forgot. Tonight's the night we're being joined by whales as we explore the fifth day of creation in Genesis, where it talks about the creation of the sea animals, the air animals, and the great sea monsters, and talk about the creatureliness of God. Our discussion is going to include, be far-ranging, including especially discussion about God's playfulness indicated in creation. So if you are struggling this evening and really could use a bit more play in your life, this episode is probably for you. Helping us join in that discussion will be Dr. Bruce Epperly, who has written 22 books on various spiritual matters. I'm struggling not to be envious of 22 books versus my 3, but he's such a generous-spirited kind of guy, it's hard to hang on to that. But one of those books is called The Center is Everywhere, a book on Celtic Christianity, which has been a sub-theme of our series. Also helping us explore the creatureliness of God is one who's been with us this whole time. That is John Philip Newell, one of the world's preeminent experts on Celtic Christianity. And we've been especially delving into his book, The Book of Creation. John Philip Newell will be joining us as well via video. So, well, your engagement with this episode tonight will be particularly enhanced if you will consider a specific question. Hold it kind of close to you, but lightly. Where in your life could you really use some discernment right now? Is there a question that's been nagging at you in particularly? Simply identify that question, hold it close, and you may just find some insight coming from an unexpected place. But before we go any further, let's take a look at what happened last week. We don't have to take Genesis 1 as some scientific account of how things happened, but rather Genesis 1 is part of that deep intuitive structure of our faith tradition, which is really talking about how God self-discloses God's very self as love.
If God is in all of creation, which I believe that God is in all of creation, then how we treat creation says something about our relationship with God.
Within bounds, if the damage is not too severe, the body will heal itself, a piece of ground will heal itself, the oceans will heal themselves, rivers will run clear. And that power of renewal in the wild world is a great source of hope, I believe.
We keep forgetting, of course, that the ego is given to serve that center or that true depth within us, not to be the center.
Poor communities, I do believe, bear the brunt of climate change in many ways.
Keen observations, self-awareness, and meditations brings us just a bit closer to the outer and inner cosmic illuminations.
The way John puts it is, Jesus came to bring us life now, not in some future time, but right now.
We were meant to fly like everyone, fly like we were meant to fly.
One, two, three.
We've often suspected the creaturely, and again this is a sort of false exaltation of humanity. We've often seen ourselves as above the earth or an exception to the earth, and certainly we've seen ourselves as being above the creatures rather than as having come from the same soil and same journey as the creatures. But this is often tangled up again with the doctrine of original sin, and we've often identified creatureliness with sinfulness, or we've seen the animal in us as being opposed to God rather than the creaturely as being made by God. St. Columbanus in the 6th century said, if you wish to know the Creator, come to know the creatures. The creatures have been made by the Creator. And there's been this real disconnect, of course, between spirit and matter, between spirituality and sexuality. There's been this tragic doubting of our sexual energies, and this either trying to transcend them, this notion of celibacy being somehow a higher path. I do believe it is a distinct path to be honored, but to ever hold it up as a higher path, I think has been a real tragedy in our Christian inheritance, and it's something that has not equipped us to deal with many of the sexuality issues and sexual identity issues of today, because the very starting point of how we approach our sexual energies has often been a negative one, rather than seeing this holy yearning for oneness, for union, for procreativity as being something that comes from very close to the heart of God. And in the Celtic world generally, we find quite a celebration of the senses, and pointing to the sort of inner senses of our being, but weaving those very closely together with the outward and physical senses of our being. And I love which in so much Celtic art there is the everlasting pattern employed artistically, in which there's basically one line that is weaving inseparably together through the artistic design. So at one curve of the line you'll have an angel, at the next curve you'll have a human being, at the next curve you'll have a bird in flight or a creature of the sea. And part of what it's saying is that we're all interwoven. Life is like one single flow, and within that flow there are different manifestations, and then these almost dissolve and become another manifestation. And it's a bit like the shape-shifting in a lot of Celtic legend, in which you'll have a story in which the creature will emerge from the sea, and on the seashore, the creature from the sea will become a beautiful woman, and then she will become a creature, a bird of the air, all pointing to this continuous flow between the human, the angelic, and the creaturely, rather than a categorizing and often a diminishing of the creaturely in relation to the human or the angelic.
So getting to know God through the creatures of the earth are one way we can get started with going with the flow of things, right?
I love that. Yeah, that quote by Columbanus, you can get to know God by getting to know God's creatures. So noticing on chat, someone put in a question already. Does that mean that God is the sum total of all of creation, or is there more? And how would we know? Interesting question.
Yeah. There was conversation, I think, in the books as that we're reading along the book of creation, as we're reading along, that it's not just the sum total of all that is God, but God is always outside of that as well, so there's always more beyond that.
Yeah.
But how would we know is a good question.
Yeah. I think it ultimately comes down to that deep intuitive sense, and since today is the 200th birthday of Soren Kierkegaard, it might get a little existential here, but that whole, in the experiential reality, at least in so many of our experiences, we sense that there, within ourselves, there are kind of intuitions, there are insights that come from, that are more than the sum total of ourselves, that there's something that comes in from the outside that keeps suggesting there is more to ourselves than that, and by extension, probably more to creation.
So if I get to know the whales, will they help me learn to sing?
Good question. Good question. Actually, if you get to know the whales, you can learn a lot of things about God. I think we had Katie Payne here, who's an acoustic biologist, a couple months ago, not on Darkwood Brew, but at our church, Countryside Community Church, and she was playing for us recordings of these whales, and you heard at the front of the episode, and it just sounds like a bunch of random kind of squeaks and squawks and so forth. But then she said, actually, what you've been listening to, and it was 4 minutes long, you've been actually listening to almost one complete song. That it actually, the song had a rhythm to it, it had codas and repeats and so forth, and the song was repeatable. The same whale could repeat the song over and over again, and all the whales in the pod that were in Bermuda at the time were singing that same pod. She, in fact, I've got a slide of the musical score. Those of you who are instrumentalists or musicians would appreciate this. This is the audio recording, a tracing of that. But that is one complete whale song, and whales actually sing this to each other, and then they start innovating over a period of a couple months. They'll swap a verse, so to speak, and put in a new one. They really actually compose music, under the waters. You'd never guess.
99 bottles of beer on the wall, or
that's right. That's right. Something like that. I don't know, but or blubber or something. Yeah. And she also played us the night she came. We heard all this whale stuff, and then she played us this recording. And see if you can guess what kind of bird is making this sound. Those of you who are avid birders.
birds of the sea.
You heard Katie Payne's voice in the background. These actually are not birds literally of the sea. This is a whale. Also, the recording has simply been sped up.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Sounds like a bird.
Yeah, it sure does, doesn't it? In our text this evening, actually, it's the sea creatures and the air creatures that are related to each other. It's just kind of fun. The interconnectedness of creation, pretty amazing.
And how we care for that creation is always top of our minds, right? We are partners now with the United Church of Christ, who's doing a national campaign for One Earth, Mission for One Earth, and how we take care of the earth. So we have an update. All right,
what are the numbers? We're looking for what, 1 million?
A million Earth Care hours, and we're up to 137,506.
Yeah, that's a pretty sizable jump over last week. I think we've just got, what, 2 more weeks left, though, so people out there are going to need to...
Goes through the 19th, so we have the today, and then the 12th and the 19th, right? Cool. And today we went paperless on Paperless Sunday, so we're going to up that a bit.
You've got paper there.
Well, yeah, this doesn't count. We didn't have bulletins today.
Yeah, church, yeah, that's right.
The second goal, moving on quickly, 100,000 trees. We're at 27,558. And goal number 3, 100,000 advocacy letters. We're at 16,178.
All right. Well,
so get online.
Yeah,
and
challenges
record
ahead.
Those hours.
Yeah. Incidentally, watching Darkwood Brew for an hour counts as an hour of Earth Care, according to the UCC's the way they're adding the math. If we were simply focusing on Earth Care, learning about it, or doing participating in a worship service that focuses on that, that also counts. So if you log your hours in at ucc.org/earth. Right. We'll keep those numbers going. We're trying to help the United Church of Christ build up quite a few Earth Care hours and advocacy letters and plant a few trees.
Yeah. We're going to give away trees for Mother's Day next week. So
yeah, that'll be fun.
We'll have lots more trees planted next week.
Absolutely. We have a special Mother's Day treat coming up also for you next week. And Matt Wallace, our Darkwood Brew director, is going to tell you about it as he introduces the rest of the band.
Yeah, we'll be joined by the great Chuck Moronic next week on Darkwood Brew. But for those of you in the Omaha and surrounding areas, he's doing a concert here at Countryside Church next Sunday at 2 p.m. Big choir, Carol Rogers, 6-piece band. He's written, he's working on all 150 psalms. We're going to do 10 of them Sunday at 2 o'clock, and then I'm sure we'll do a couple of them here. Want to introduce the guys in the band: Jeremy Haig, Greg Hall, John Haig. And we're going to do some Haig Brothers originals a little later. But first, this.
From you guys a little later. And before we go to Bruce Epperly, we also want to thank you all for the donations that came in this week. They keep coming in, never a huge avalanche, but they keep consistently coming in, and that's really especially helpful to us now as we have a doubling matching grant up to $25,000 right now. So thank you very much for your support. You keep us not only on the air, but also motivated, and we really feel appreciated out there. So thank you sincerely for your support. Well, let's turn now to Bruce Epperly, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. Bruce, it's good to have you with us tonight.
Well, it's always good to see you, Eric, and to be on your program. It's a great gift to me when I listen to it on Sundays.
Oh, great. Well, and you've been on before during our series we did this last fall on listening for the Spirit in our lives too, and you had a lot of very positive buzz that came off of that. We thought, boy, it'd be great to have you back again, especially given that you've written a book on Celtic Christianity.
And the Spirit is present in the Genesis readings and in the whole image of God as creaturely. I mean, no one says it any better than Philip Newell about the whole sense of the sensuality of life, and to pray with your eyes open and to see those whales sporting and the sea monsters and the seagulls and the ospreys. What a great testimony to the glory of God.
That's right. That's right. Well, for those who aren't familiar with you, can you give us a little thumbnail sketch? I know you were a professor at Lancaster Theological Seminary, and you were about to be going up to Cape Cod.
Well, yeah, I guess up there they call people like me a washashore. I'll be a newcomer to Cape Cod. I'll be coming as pastor of South Congregational Church in Centerville, just right off Craigville Beach, and a few miles from Hyannisport, where the Kennedys lived, and a glorious place. So if you're in Cape Cod, come visit us at South Congregational United Church of Christ. I'll be coming up there as of July 14th.
Wonderful, wonderful. So what got you interested in Celtic Christian spirituality to begin with?
I think it was pure, gentle providence. I came upon some books by Philip Newell. I had read about the controversies between Augustine and Pelagius, and always felt that Pelagius got a bit of a bad rap. That indeed it was a little bit like an earlier presidential election in which really a small group of people basically farmed Pelagius out and declared him a heretic. I often wonder in alternative Christian histories, what would have happened if both Augustine and his emphasis on the sort of the spiritualizing aspects of life and Pelagius on his emphasis on the incarnation would have both been included rather than one being sort of set to the sidelines. In theology classes, oftentimes the worst thing you can say about somebody's mother is to say they were Pelagian.
Right.
But there's a lot of wisdom.
I can think of a few worse things to say about somebody's mother, but...
Yes, it more or less discounts anything, but Pelagius basically says that God is present in the earth upon which we walk, the air we breathe, the whales sporting, a number of right whales off Nantucket Sound, that God is present in all things embodied, and it is indeed a world that was created for beauty. You know, I've been pondering this. I'm a fellow who writes lectionary commentaries, and of course I get a few weeks ahead, and I happen to be reading Proverbs 8 earlier today for Trinity Sunday, about how God creates the universe in delight, and how Sophia, the divine one, basically is God's delight and creates the universe in a sense of playfulness. And that's really a wonderful testimony, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that seems to be a common thread within the Celtic Christian spirituality, is that playfulness.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really cuts across the different traditions. I was thinking this morning about the Hindu notion of Lila, the creation of the universe was for play, for the light of God, that God wasn't just about the business of putting in 8 hours of work and being kind of sad about it, but that God really does like the galaxy spinning in the universe, that God really does enjoy seeing an osprey fly or a bald eagle or a humpback whale, that enjoys the music of this. Perhaps God is not really a boring God, but enjoys beauty. And in many ways, the philosopher Whitehead might have been correct when he said, the aim of the universe is the creation or production of beauty.
Yeah. Now, as a modern day Christian who also accepts, I'm guessing you accept the theory of evolution, how can we say that God created these things if we also embrace evolution, or is it just simply random chance that created all these things?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and I don't really think it's an either-or. I think that there's a tendency to think God just deals with spiritual issues. I would rather say that the whole thing is spiritual, including the randomness. I happen to believe that events in our lives emerge from a variety of causes. Some of them are accidental, some of them are intentional, some of them involve God, and I suspect that God worked as the passage from Proverbs suggests, like an artist, working with a creation that's always been here, that's been there. When did God begin creating? Well, maybe never. Maybe this 15 billion or 14.7 billion year journey was part of something moving through another wormhole in the universe. That the universe is really the result of a combination of creative wisdom and the choices made by creatures and accidental happenings, as well as natural selection. And I don't think you can separate any of these.
Yeah, yeah. So and you mentioned in our conversation earlier this week, as we were looking ahead to this episode, I was tossing out the observation that the Hebrews and their kissing cousins, the Canaanites, well, they didn't always kiss, but
no,
they were at
that's
war with
for
each
sure.
other. But they actually viewed the ocean with a fair amount of fear and trepidation. They were desert-dwelling peoples, and their encounter with the ocean, really. People who really value water and fresh water, water crops to keep you alive. Suddenly you see the sea before you for the first time, and what do you think? Oh my gosh, I can drink to my heart's content. I can feed my crops, and you get completely. It feels like a betrayal. The encounter with sea, and so they really held the sea with kind of back. In fact, the Canaanites thought the sea represented an evil god, but which we don't see reflected in the Genesis creation account. I mean, the Canaanites saw the sea as representing evil, but they also thought that the sea was capable of defeating their high god Baal. The Hebrews felt that there was something above the power of the sea, and so they trusted. They sensed there must be something good in it. It sounds like the Celtic Christians also trusted in the goodness of the sea. In fact, had a much more comfortable relationship with the sea.
Well, they were seagoing people. There are all sorts of tales about Celts going forth onto the ocean with a rudderless boat and letting the sea take them to what they called their place of resurrection, which was the place where you're intended to go, the sort of providential space where God wishes you to be. They were seafaring people, not unlike the folks along the Nantucket and Cape Cod coast. However, they've understood both the beauty of the sea, the mystery of the sea, and the wildness of the sea. I mean, the Celts recognized, a little bit like C.S. Lewis in Speaking of Aslan, that God is good, the sea is good, but it isn't always safe.
Yeah.
There may be storms at sea. There may be a nor'easter coming forth up the Atlantic coast. And I think in many ways that's part of the dynamic nature of the universe, and maybe evolution too. There's wildness, there's unexpectedness, there's providence, there's beauty, and these are all sort of put together in one creative synthesis. But certainly, if you've ever been, or I'd commend people to go online and see this picture of the Isle of Iona, where Philip Newell spent a lot of time. It's just this little itty-bitty island just off the coast of Scotland, and you can appreciate the wildness and the beauty alike when you're there.
So that kind of combination of beauty and danger, in a sense, kind of yields an awestruck reverence, so to speak. I wonder if that kind of points to the biblical notion of the beginning of all wisdom is the fear of God. If it's really that sense that God is not safe but is good at the same time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm thinking of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who said that radical amazement is really a religious virtue. So, in some sense, we've domesticated the amazement in life. And in many ways, in domesticating that, we've probably felt comfortable in destroying life. We felt comfortable in destroying whole species, in leveling woodlands, in exterminating the whales and other sea creatures, because we lost the spirit of amazement that this is a unique creature. In the book you mentioned, The Center is Everywhere. It invokes a traditional saying that has a variety of possible authors. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Well, if the center is everywhere, you have to ask yourself the question, where's everywhere? And everywhere is that whale. Everywhere is that little child. Everywhere is the osprey flying over Cape Cod and nesting, and they're coming back on Cape Cod. There's a wonderful book called The Return of the Osprey that I'd commend to anyone who's interested in naturalism. I'll think of the author during the break. But every place is the center. And of course, if you look at Psalm 148 to 50, it's really a poem about the non-humans praising God. And the last word of the psalm says, let everything that breathes praise God. It doesn't say humans. It says the bird that flies, the fish that swims, the sea monster, Leviathan. It says everything that breathes, which implies that these animals, and here we are at day 5, we're doing quite fine without us.
Yeah.
That these animals had a value to God before humans came on the scene. And of course, Jesus brought this into play when he said that, God takes account of the sparrow. God takes account of the sparrow, not because we like watching sparrows, but because the sparrow has value in and of itself outside of our need to watch them or preserve them. And I think it's really important as part of our care for creation to realize it's not all about us. They've been here before us. They may be here after us. We hope we're all here together. But in terms of Genesis, if you read it well, and not a lot of preachers who think they know the Bible have read Genesis well, but I think it says that it's not anthropomorphic at all. We may be created in the image of God, but the implication is that God's also touching these creatures in a way that reflects God's wisdom.
Yeah. I wonder if we are actually theomorphic. It doesn't go, it actually goes the other way.
Right. I mean, our value comes because of God's care, too, in this story. And so we're in the same boat as the non-human animals. The human animal is quite fine and beloved by God and has unique capabilities and is certainly shares in God's everlasting journey, but probably these non-humans do as well. I mean, I will share a story that I've told many times about when I became a theologian at the age 4. When I had visited this woman who had a lovely dog. I spent the weekend with her while my folks were on a church meeting. And I fell in love with her dog named Taffy, and I asked her if Taffy was going to heaven. And she just thought I'd broken the best china. She had that look on her face and says, go talk to your dad about this. He'll tell you that Jesus didn't die for their sins, and that settled it. But at the time, I felt that her invocation of Taffy as being not loved by God and maybe not even participating in God's great journey, it was not what a loving child needed to hear at that moment, who believed that this dog also was loved by God because I loved it.
Yeah. So how do you suppose we've lost track of that kind of awestruck reverence that really does lead to a greater engagement with the environment, sensitivity to it, appreciation for it, and also appreciation for the dangers it holds, intention?
I think some of it has been insulation from nature.
Yeah.
Some of it has been just we're too darn busy. I think of Mary Oliver's poem, A Summer Day, in which she talks about sitting and watching a grasshopper and asks the question, well, what else should I have been done today but watch that? And then she says, I don't know what prayer is, but I think it's paying attention. And then she asks the question, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? And of course, up where I'm going in Cape Cod, Utah, had Thoreau and Emerson and folks like that spent lifetimes just pausing. And one of my spiritual teachers, Gerald May, once spoke of the spiritual journey as pausing and noticing and opening, yielding and stretching, and then responding. And we don't pause enough. One translation of "Be still and know that I am God" is pause a while. Pause a while. Look up at the stars. Hear the sounds of the crickets. If it's summertime in your part of the world where you have fireflies, spend some time looking at the fireflies. Look at the birds flying. Look at your child. I mean, I love being online. I'm online a lot. I check my email and Facebook all day long. And sometimes I have to say, no, my grandchildren are here today. What am I doing that for? My wife's in front of me. Is she not more important than finding out whether or not I got a message on Facebook?
Well, if I sent you the message, I mean, come on.
Well, from you, of course. I just drop everything, and of course but I've learned to take internet Sabbaths myself, where I just say for the next 4 or 5 hours, the world can live without any communication from me.
Yeah, that's right. So you have talked about playfulness as being an important part of our spiritual journey and also an important part of our earth care. Now, in an age where the environment is really under siege, and we hear about the entire massive coral reefs really starting to die, which take 100,000 years to replace if they actually do die, things like this, how can we afford to be playful? Shouldn't we just basically get our nose to the grindstone and get to work on saving the earth?
Well, I think we have to do both. And I remember another little motto I once read at Kirkridge Retreat Center up in Bangor, Pennsylvania, another wonderful place to go, and it's connected with the Celtic tradition. Pick it and pray. In other words, do your work. Write into your representatives. See what you can do to preserve the ponds and the woodlands and the oceans and the sea creatures. But it's going to be the moral arc of history takes a long time. And I'm concerned that the Crusaders burn out, polarize, and become just as nasty as the ones they oppose. And I think a little playfulness in the sense of realizing that the universe has been here before we got there, that there's billions of galaxies, that we're part of something really important.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's dealing with a non-curable cancer, and we were having a conversation about this the other day, and we were talking about the cosmos, and she made the comment, she's dealing with an experimental treatment right now, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, that I'm part of the cosmos, so take my life seriously, but my death isn't the only thing going on.
Right.
And that there's a cosmos that preceded me that I will be part of. I think we have to do both because we're preserving the environment in part so that those animals can continue to sport in the sea.
Yeah.
So our children can go to Laguna Beach or Craigville Beach out on the Cape, so they can see ponds and swamps in the Mississippi River, and so the animals can as well. And so it's a combination of rejuvenation, and I think if we become agents of the creation of beauty in all that we do. In the Bible, there's a big emphasis on blessing. And I think really we can have a politics of blessing right now and a religion of blessing that doesn't exclude anyone, even when we are contesting in relationship to others, and which sees sometimes the challenges as well as the wonders of life. It's both and, I think.
Yeah. I wonder if our, in a sense, if we look at creation as a theophany of God or a self-manifestation, if we want to find, if we want to know God, look at God's creatures, as John Philip Newell had cited Columbanus. If that's the case, then, and you think about whales composing songs for each other, if that's part of the natural evolutionary process that has allowed them to survive for eons, it seems that there's something about play that is actually crucial for our survival. That if we don't learn to play, perhaps we actually won't learn about how to survive in the long run.
Well, and I don't think the sociobiologists have said the final word. The sociobiologists and certain evolutionary theorists make it seem like it's all work.
Right.
Sometimes the bird may simply enjoy singing.
Exactly.
Charles Hartshorne, a philosopher, once wrote a book called Born to Sing, in which he suggested that birds have experiences, and because they have experiences, they can actually enjoy what's going on in our life as well as just simply mate to reproduce. And certainly the same could apply for us. Is our work the end of our life, or do we work because of the joy of it? And I think social justice issues are connected with playfulness, because we want to relate, we want to be part of a creative process in which people are not simply working and slaving all day long, but they can come home and play with their children.
Yeah.
They can go read good books. They can go to a symphony or a ball game. Children can laugh into their whole life rather than be installed into some sort of bondage and slavery or sweatshops. I mean, I think justice is partly about those children being able to laugh.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would think also, if you just looking at it from a purely biological perspective, if you look at even human beings, if there's no enjoyment of life, there's really low survival energy. People don't tend to thrive at all, and even animals who are put into, for instance, into captivity, who are not having being well cared for, they actually have no ability to play and so forth. They tend to die. That I wonder if there is something actually crucial about enjoying life that is even actually part of our survival, and that if we don't pay attention to that, our own playfulness and that of creation, our survival is actually threatened.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think one of the first books on holistic medicine or holistic health was written in the Western world was Norman Cousins' book, An Anatomy of an Illness. And he talked about how laughter reduced his pain threshold such that he had less pain when he laughed. And he actually brought in comedies, watched them on television, laughed so much that they discharged him out of the hospital because he was bothering other patients by being so happy. And that in some level, you look at a holistic perspective, when people have hope, enjoyment, a reason to live, a reason to wake up in the morning, love, that translates from soul to cell. So I think there's no reason, if you talk about evolution as a continuity between different species, the sporting of the whale may very well contribute to its own well-being, and the joy that children, adults, and non-humans feel may very well be a contributor to well-being. And I think of the Kabbalistic Jewish mysticism comment that if you save one soul, you save the universe. Mm-hmm. So the person who's working for justice also has to pay attention to the child in front of them. That child is part of the salvation of the universe, so that if you're a peace crusader or a social justice crusader, as we ought to take care of both of those ought to be high on our priority, we still have to stop and play catch with our child, go to a movie, eat some popcorn, sing and dance in church, listen to some jazz on a Sunday afternoon.
That's right. Amen. Well, we're going to, on that note, we're going to take a break now and move to our central passage this evening and come back to you a little bit later, Bruce. Our passage this evening being Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 to 23. If you're just joining us for the first time, we approach Scripture in a way that is a bit uncommon in church circles these days, but by using an ancient practice based on Lectio Divina, which started 1,500 years ago. You will hear the passage read 4 times over the course of 8 minutes. And during this time, if you will hear instructions given on how to approach and engage this passage. History has shown that if you will follow this flow, there's a high chance that you will discover some insight that strikes you that you had not anticipated, either during our time together or later on this evening or the next day as you continue to contemplate using this form. But what really brings this form into its own is if you will take that question that you identified perhaps at the beginning of this episode. If you didn't do it, we invite you to do it now. Simply take the next 30 seconds as music plays to identify a question that is deeply important to you about your present situation. That if you were to sit in God's presence and actually receive insight, like for real, not just pretend, what's the question you would ask? What's the help you would seek? Find that question. Let it kind of center itself within you so that it is present, but you can hold it loosely as we go into our Pneuma Divina exercise. Now, as you hear the passage for the first time, simply take in the passage as a whole and ask yourself, what is the basic passage trying to say? This is the most intellectual part of our Pneuma exercise. If you want, I would invite you to close your eyes after you've heard the passage and contemplate it, or you can see the passage continually cycle on the screen. Let us hear Genesis 1, verses 20 to 23.
And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, across the dome of the sky." So God created great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day.
Now, as you hear the passage read once more, pay attention to what word or phrase you are drawn to Just whatever word or phrase. You don't need to know why you were drawn to it or what you remember, but just find that. And then once you find it, think of every iteration of that word or phrase in your life experience that you can find. Every way you see this in the world.
Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day.
Now, as you hear the passage read a third time, simply take that phrase or that word that you were drawn to and hold it up next to the question you were drawn to, and see what conversation could be had, even if none seems to be apparent, no connection seems to be apparent. Find the conversation.
And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day.
Now, as you hear the passage read one final time, if you have found insight already, simply ask yourself what decisions need to be made, what commitments. Otherwise, simply continue the conversation between your phrase and your question.
And God said, Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day.
Well, we encourage you to simply hold that conversation close over the next this evening and over the next day or so. There is experiences told us, and 1,500 years of history have told us that the chances are very, very high that if you keep that conversation, hold that close, that if nothing's come yet, and in 8 minutes we can't put God in a box, that something will come. It's an amazing experience to sense that coming in from left field, a place that you didn't anticipate it, that really changes the whole view of the situation before you. Well, we're going to go to our musical feature at this time and continue that conversation, that inward conversation. And when we come back, we'll be again with Bruce Epperly. And we encourage you, if you're on chat, to simply log in your own responses to the Scripture, your comments, your questions, and we'll bring them up with Bruce. And in the coffee house, the same goes for you. If you have questions, comments, we'll take them after our musical feature.
The sun is long and it's pretty tonight. Watch it is to drink the light. Confusing cars and continuing road cannot interrupt the sight. I designate the passing of time. Oh yeah, you know I'm gonna be alright. I am a satellite circling you from above. Afraid that if I'm moving too close, I burn up. You look perfect in the nature's dress. It's time that I forget the rest. I've played games before and I've lost them. You provide a much tougher test. Oh, I celebrate the passing of time. Oh, yeah. You know I'm gonna be alright. Satellite circling you from above. Afraid that if I'm moving too close, I burn up. When can I move? if I'm moving too close.
The Haig brothers with the Brew brothers. Nice combination. Good. Well, we're going to go back to Bruce Epperly and invite conversation from you and from the coffee house. Good to see you again, Bruce.
Good to be here.
And Chris, has there been some questions or comments come up on the internet?
There have been. There's some conversation going on about the fecundity of God again, where you're talking about the creatures being able to multiply, be fruitful, multiply, recreate, continue God's creation, I guess. And then the idea that we must care for all the creatures as they care for us. But very specifically, there was one that said, I was struck by the idea that God says multiply and fill the earth, and yet the earth isn't overrun by creatures. Fullness in creation terms seems to imply space as well, giving each other space, allowing for space in one's life too.
Bruce, you have any comments about space and multiplication?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question, and it seems to me that the question of space is a key question. We need space to breathe. We need space to walk. We need space to swim. And so do the animals. And I think that one of the things we're discovering is that there is a need for wild spaces. There's a need for us not to be in control of everything. There's a need for us not to domesticate everything. And I think the multiplication, of course, is potentially infinite, but always finite in a sense that death is part of a good universe. We are not here forever, and perhaps that's the question that Mary Oliver is speaking to. This is a wild and precious life. Let's do something really important with this life. Let's decide what's important, not just for us as individuals, because, of course, the biblical tradition is not individualistic. It's about the whole interdependence of life in which we're part of a larger community. And we need to create spaces for Sabbath and spaces for holiness. And of course, the Celts often spoke of thin places, which are potentially everywhere we find ourselves, that thin places are, in fact, where we encounter the holy who is always here.
Yeah. Maybe in light of that comment, too, the empty places sometimes get quite thin, too. If we look at the way the animals fill the earth, and yet they don't overrun the earth. They actually allow space for each other. And if the animals, if we look to creation and the creatures as a sign of who God is and what our relationship with God is in our inner world, perhaps those empty spaces in our own time schedules, perhaps even within our internal selves, are places of revelation or thin places. I know in my own spiritual practices, I use a number of kind of techniques to kind of get out of myself and kind of let go of my control. And, one of them being a form of Lectio Divina, but another form, if I find I'm just in a real jam on something, I stop and I pay attention to where I'm feeling that jam in my body, even though the jam's all, I've been in my head and can't figure something out. I stop and I ask, where am I feeling that in my body? And then I simply concentrate on kind of drawing a circle around that and emptying it, like making it actually, envisioning a literal hole through me through which the wind may blow. And creating that empty space actually, surprisingly, triggers a lot of insight within the emptiness rather than the fullness.
I think that's wonderful, Eric, and certainly I hope the folks who are listening and take that as a possible practice for themselves. I think of kind of weaving your day through the simplest activity, which of course is breathing. And one of the things I've tried to do and advise others is to, between every task, to take a few breaths. Getting ready to log on to the computer, checking Facebook, answering the phone, hearing a knock at your door, going out to drive, and creating that, even if it's just a momentary empty space. The other is a practice that the Celts used. It was called the encircling, or came, where people just simply drew a circle around themselves whenever they were about to embark upon a journey, to remind themselves they were always in a sacred and safe place in spite of all the challenges of life.
That's good. Well, Chris has indicated there's another question or comment from the internet.
Yeah, one of the discussions that they had a little bit earlier on in our discussion, talking about the theophany of God in Creatureliness. The question is, how does evil enter a world where everything is a theophany of God?
Good question.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And of course, we have to bow down in mystery to some level, but I think we also have to note that in this sort of interdependence of life, in which there is accident and chance and the desire to survive, and carnivores and herbivores, as well as divine providence, built into it, we wouldn't even call this evil, is the fact that there is a certain element of destructiveness in life. Beyond that, I think that creatures, especially at our level of evolution, have the opportunity to intend evil as well as to intend good and beauty. So I'd say that from my perspective as a theologian, the fact that there is space between God and us, you might say, that God on the day of rest, again, going back to Jewish mysticism, on the day of rest, gives the universe an opportunity to stretch out, gives the universe an opportunity to make free decisions, that God is not in control of every event in our lives. And we can do some amazingly good things, and God wants us to do amazingly good things. I don't think God competes with us. God actually wants us to do great and wonderful things. But we also have the possibility of doing some things that hurt one another and bring ugliness into the world. This is a complex question, but at the very least, I think it's built into the interdependence and the fact there's a lot of factors at work in every moment of experience.
Yeah.
We both dealt with serious illnesses in our family, and we know that sometimes stuff happens. A few chemicals are in the wrong place, a few cells are in the wrong place. Who knows how they got there? But they're also part of the intentionality that we have to get well, and prayers, and the physician, and the chemotherapy, and all that sort of thing. And God's intent, that's part of that whole process. It includes those random cells that got there who knows how, in the wrong place at the wrong time for loved ones.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we're going to have to call this to a close. You got me thinking about the poet David White, and was strongly influenced by the Celtic Christian tradition as well,
Yes.
and how he'll talk about human beings really are the only ones who can actually, all of creation really, who will even kind of complain about their situation, like they might want to be somebody else than they've been created to be. You don't see a kingfisher, for instance, sitting on its perch above the ocean saying, "Oh, woe is to me, I'm a kingfisher. I'm just really tired of this kingfisher gig. If I could only just be a rat or something. I don't like jumping in the water all the time and I get wringing wet. And if I could just be a rat for a day. But we ourselves do. You know,
Yes.
and it seems that most of the evil in the world, in my perspective, comes from us not wanting to be ourselves. You know, not you're trying to be someone else, something else than we've been created to be. The problem isn't with what has been created to be; it's in the denial of what we've been created to be. But
yeah, and I think that's part of the Genesis passage, which I was listening with you to, Eric. Was the words that came to me were, "I am blessed; they are blessed. I am good; they are good."
Yeah.
Being blessed and being good means right here, right now, on Skype, listening to this, playing music, talking. This is our one wild and precious life. Let's live it.
Amen. Well, you have definitely blessed us, and you've been good, good guests. Thank you so much for joining us again, Bruce, and look forward to it another time.
Well, it's a joy. See you later on. God bless.
Well, at this time we are going to get prepared for communion, and if you are online, we invite you to join us as well. Even though we be at a distance, we are not at any kind of distance in our connection with each other internally. If you have bread and wine or juice and crackers at home or other elements, we invite you to get those ready. When we come back, we'll share this most sacred meal. Thanks, guys. I still find myself reflecting on a couple comments made by our viewers this evening. One that came on early in the episode about how do we know that God is more than the sum total of all of creation, and then this last question that came in about really the existence of evil in the world. And I think part of the way I myself trust that God is actually far more than simply the created order is that there seems to be a way that we can look at the world and actually love creation even when evil strikes us, that we can actually find goodness or draw goodness out of even the most distressing and tumultuous of situations. And that's something I don't think I have the native ability to do. Going back to those Canaanites and the Israelites, the Canaanites and the Israelites held that a similar kind of fear and dread of the sea. Yet the Canaanites really held on to that dread so much that they named their evil god Yam, which means sea. And that was their god, and they believed that Yam was actually more powerful than the god that they worshipped as the Lord of their lives, which was Baal, which literally means Lord. In their mythology, Yam actually defeated Lord. Sea defeated Lord in this great epic battle. Now that Lord was later resurrected, but that's a story for another time. But bottom line is they saw that there was a power that was higher than their Lord. The Hebrews, even though they shared that dread of the sea, that suspicion of the sea, they also found in the sea to be a great source of blessing and abundance. The Genesis passage, you see nothing that would indicate that the sea is at all evil. That's because they trusted that God was the creator of the sea and therefore the Lord of the sea. that amidst the tumult of the sea that they experienced in their own life, and that actually that the Lord was the Lord of over the tumult. And as they applied this to their own lives, they realized that in their own challenges, their own struggles, those times when the way ahead just seemed like there was no way, that they had a Lord that was higher than the struggle that presented itself to them. And when they turned that situation over to that higher power, they saw not simply the possibility of destruction, but the possibility of blessing, the possibility of the creative next move, the potential within the situation. I think that all comes together in this meal, which 2,000 years ago was instituted by the one who, according to the Gospels, not only lived next to the Sea of Galilee, but stood upon the stormy sea, stilled the stormy sea as well. This is the one who calls out to us even now. As we remember on a night of betrayal and desertion, Jesus took bread and broke it, saying, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this as often as you eat of it in remembrance of me." And so likewise, he took the cup, saying, "This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me." By eating this bread and drinking this cup, we remember Christ's death. We celebrate Christ's resurrection. And we know that in this meal, that not even death has the final word, that there is a Lord who is over even death. And if there's a Lord who is over even death, there's a Lord who can help us in our deepest struggles, calling us out over the stormy seas, not only to get out of the boat of our safety, but to walk on that water, perhaps even to dance. The gifts of God for the people of God. I invite you to partake of the feast, the bread of life, the cup of blessing. Thanks, guys. Good to have the Haig brothers with us again, and we're looking forward to Chuck Moronic and Carol Rogers joining us next week with some jazz psalms. Also joining us next week to explore the next day of creation will be actually not the one that's up on the screen. She'll be here for the final day of our series on May 19th, but John Philip Newell will be joining us via video, but for an extended interview we had with him earlier on the image of God in creation. What does the image of God in creation have to tell us about living our lives? Finally, joining us on May 19th will be Linda Yaramillo, who is with the National Office of the United Church of Christ, and is the head of the Social Witness, Justice and Witness Ministries for that denomination. And she'll be here celebrating the culmination of the 4-1 Earth campaign. So Keep logging in those hours at ucc.org/earth, and let's help the UCC build up that help for the environment and that witness in the world. Well, until we see you again next week, friends, may the Spirit of the living God made known to us most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord, go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into places you may not necessarily go yourself, go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you, go beside you to be your strong companion, and dwell within you to remind you that you are surely not alone, and you are loved beyond your wildest imagination. And may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you, now and always. Amen.
1, 2, 3.